Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tabletop for Two, Episode 6. This is a D&D duet show where we take a deep dive into playing one-on-one 5e. But just a second before we begin, we want to take a brief moment to introduce ourselves. I'm Beth Ball, a game designer and fantasy author, and one of the two writers behind D&D Duet. And joining me is the other writer behind D&D Duet, Jonathan Ball, who is a game designer and educator. Our work for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons centers around adventures and advice for playing one-on-one D&D. Hello, friends in chat. We're so happy that you're here. If you want to find out more about the special playing style or find adventures to help you along your way, you can go to dndduet.com. You can also follow us on socials, on Twitter at dndduet, and on Instagram at dndduet. So our special episode tonight... Our special episode tonight is about playing one-on-one D&D with kids. This is something that we're seeing more and more, and especially because of the pandemic, but I also think, just because it's fun and it's a request we've been getting more often. So what are some of the special considerations to keep in mind when playing with kids at the table? What are some of the principles that we'll discuss some principles tonight, some that apply specifically to gaming with kids, some that are more oriented to playing in a duet with kids. And just as a disclaimer, we do not have children. We're happily child-free, but we think it's really important that people get to play with their kids if they so desire. So we're hoping that this is really more of a starting off point for a larger conversation than it is meant to be like, this is how you do this thing. Because, well, we can't really say from experience. We've talked to some other parents, and so that's the good news, I suppose. But so some of the advice that we're giving tonight is outsourced and based on other people's experience. But parents out there, if you're watching this video, please get in touch with us. Let us know. Leave a note in the comments, whatever it is that works for you.
Yeah.
Because there are plenty of people who want to play with their kids, and we want them to be able to do that. And I hope this is kind of this is a conversation that will continue to develop.
And can I say too, it's super important to get them when they're young too. Like when you share something so cool as D&D with the younger generation, then they're going to take that and they're going to carry it forward into the brave new world of tomorrow. It's one of the reasons I love facilitating the D&D club at school. These young people are finding this amazing hobby so much earlier than I had the opportunity to. And that's just going to keep the hobby alive and well and verdant for a long, long time. It's good stuff. It's like belief drive stuff.
Well, baby, you wanted to play D&D, right?
Baby me desperately wanted to play D&D, but I wasn't allowed to.
I don't know if I ever put together that was why you didn't play.
Oh yeah, well, I wasn't cool enough to know anybody that played D&D, and it was one of those things that was like, well, you're rolling dice and talking about demons, so basically it's the worst. Mama, Papa,
you're so scandalous.
Can I play D&D? Just flicking holy water at me.
Oh, cool. So Mark in the chat, hello. I'm so happy you're here. So Mark is the person who wrote us an email. Can you guys please talk about this topic? Here we are. Honey, do you want to thank our patrons really fast? And then we will dive into tips for gaming with kids at the table.
Absolutely. Our patrons make all of our video content possible. So we're very deeply grateful for them and their involvement. Our patrons look forward to getting great one-on-one D&D stuff every month, and they're working with us to put together a big, beautiful Land of Vampires D&D campaign, which is very exciting. If you want to check out our Patreon. You can join them over at patreon.com/Grove Guardian Press. Also, this stream is additionally sponsored by Beth's beautiful prequel novella, Aurora, which kind of reveals some of the what's the word? Where it all began. Yeah, it reveals some of the backstory of some of the key players in Buried Heroes. So you can go check out Aurora on bethballbooks.com. And right now, I think you can get it. It's like a free download for those that join the...
So if you go to bethballbooks.com/join, you can get a free copy of Aurora if you want to join my reading community.
Oh, yes. Go pick it up. It's good. Honey, tips for gaming with kids at the table.
Okay, so the number one thing that we've gotten so far, surveying parents, I would love to hear from more parents too. I just want to keep putting that out there. From what we have learned, kids love combat across different ages, age 4, age 5, age 8. These are my sample ages primarily. They love the combat part, which I was really surprised by. I would have thought that there would be too many rules and like too much to juggle or manage at that point. But one of the dads thought that it was because that involves the most number of dice. He said that his son is like extra excited when he like gets to roll lots of dice at once and then rolls really high numbers and gets to defeat a thing. So it's our number one thing. Add in as much combat as you can. We've also gotten it was feedback from someone on, I think it was Second Glance, maybe. No, it was the Proving Glade recently, where somebody was saying that they wanted a little bit more combat because they were playing with their kid, and so added in an encounter or two in the woods, and the child was super happy.
Yeah, I think to me, my light's flickering like crazy.
Mine is too. Sorry, our power is doing something weird. So everybody just cross your fingers. It's been so finicky lately.
I think it makes sense for kids to like the combat the most, because to me, that's the thing that feels the closest to like a traditional game that they would have already been exposed to, right? And so it's like a touch point for them that's comfort. And that makes sense. There are rules to follow, and they might be complicated, but there are ways to be right, and like this is how you do it and stuff like that. And I think that for a lot of people, the structure, the formality that the combat experience or the rules entails is supportive, whereas it's easy to feel kind of unmoored for people just starting to play D&D. If you're like, okay, figure out how to navigate the king's dinner party, you're like, I'd like to use my intimidation. No, it's not how it works, right? Like, it feels a little bit nebulous if there aren't like the rules. But when you're rolling initiative, you have a turn, these are the things you can do, then I think that can feel a little bit more comfortable.
And you don't think that, I guess with a one-on-one game, combat tends to go a little bit faster than it might with going rounds. And so I think that playing in a duet with a kid kind of resolves that combat problem of, there are just the two of you. So as long as you can keep it moving. And so I think certainly keeping the things we always talk about with one-on-one combat in mind. So keeping action economy in mind. I was thinking, kind of brainstorming for our episode tonight, being especially careful about those save or stuck spell effects and other environmental things. I think it would be extra frustrating to be very small, and then you can't do anything with your character, and then all of this is riding on you. Like, so if we can avoid, whether that's the character being stunned or, whatever the things are, I think being extra careful with those sorts of spells. What are some other examples, just off the top of your head?
I don't know. I was
good at that list.
I was thinking about, I don't know, like petrification and stuff like that. But there's definitely, whenever I think about playing one-on-one D&D, I love the combat in one-on-one D&D can be a little bit snappier, because if you have a table of 8 people playing, then 2 or 3 rounds takes 2 hours, and it's like, what, are we still fighting goblins? Yeah, I feel like I should have leveled up by now. Like, and so I definitely think that generally the faster paced combat in a one-on-one campaign lends itself positively to a better, snappier combat experience that would hold the attention of a younger player too. And I mean, that's like 5e rules. There are a ton of 5e rules for combat, right? Like there's a big emphasis on 5e on swinging swords and throwing magic and doing damage and stuff like that. And so if you've it's a really easy place to interject that excitement and action. The hero gets to shine and do these impossible things in a way that is just epic. It's just fun to be an awesome slayer of whatever, right? And I think that also like along with the structure that the combat rules can lend and the comfort that comes from that structure, kids that are going to be playing D&D I'm speculating here, but would generally have an exposure to like video games and stuff like that. And so lots of video games are going to focus on the combat experience. And so that's another touch point that can make the experience of playing at a tabletop that much more heimlich, that much more familiar.
I know one of our patrons was telling us that his son, the combat is his son's favorite part, which he thought that he would have liked some of the story elements more, but so he adds in a creature for his son and his son's like companion character to face kind of whenever. And I think sometimes they play, he DMs for his wife and his son. But anyway, he's running this for just the son's PC and companion character. So they went on like a potty break in the woods and he had a knoll waiting there. And he said his son was just beaming the whole rest of the day after he defeated the knoll. And I thought that was so cute. Just like, feeling really fancy and heroic. I mean, we know that feeling of like you cast something with D12s and you rolled a nat 20, so like double the D12 damage and you roll high. It's like, and I think that totally comes across whatever age you are.
The other day at D&D Club, this was a few sessions back, but I had most of the party didn't show up, and so I was just running with 2 characters, and I could tell that they were kind of they were feeling a little bit. We were doing Icewind Dale, and they were feeling a little bit kind of ambivalent about the first little elemental adventure. Like they're hunting these tiny snow elementals, and it's like the cutesy introduction to Icewind Dale. And I was like, oh, it's right here. I'll just run this. And they're like, okay, we're going around with the lantern of elemental finding. Like, are there any elementals over here? No, okay. This is boring. And then I had them trip over a frozen zombie that wasn't in the, book as written, but I could tell they were flagging. Throw in a frozen zombie, and they were on it.
So they immediately perked up while playing?
Yes. So.
Can you, just for the folks at home, what age are the kids in D&D Club?
Our D&D Club has, I work at a high school, and so our D&D Club has kids playing in it that range from, 14. We have some kids coming over from the middle school now to play in our high school D&D Club, which is cute and just speaks to how cool our D&D Club is. I mean, we attracted middle schoolers, right? So we have kids, 12 to 13 on the low end, all the way 17 and 18 on the high end for my seniors. So it's a wide range, and it's really interesting, like how they interact with each other, and it's also kind of cool too, because like sometimes I'll see them kind of click up, like, you know, the seniors are going to play a senior campaign, and we're dealing with mature themes here, to mixed success. And then sometimes, you know, like there will be a little bit of interplay between the different classes too. Like we had one of my first middle schoolers that came over had friends who were sophomores and juniors, and so he's sitting at the big kids table, and he's just very, I've got this, I know the rules. You know, he's very much there to really get the advanced experience. So
for any of the kids that are new coming in, do you simplify or change the rules, especially for kids that are younger? How do we balance that?
I think that the trick, well, when you came early in the life of the D&D club and helped me out with it, I think one of the things that we stumbled on is you get really good at communicating what's really, really important. So, for instance, you know, there has to be some kind of consensus of like, how do we act at the table? We're not all talking at the same time, or else nobody gets to do anything, right? And you're always going to be, almost always, pretty much always, 90% of the time, you're going to be rolling this one. This is the D20. And, you know, this is the biggest one. Grab this one if I ask you to do a thing. You roll that, and you add the number that's appropriate. And beyond that, I don't know, like, what other kind of core things would they need to know that you wouldn't be able to just give them the rule for, tell them how to navigate, right? Like, that's...
Mm-hmm. I'm just asking because that was one of the questions we got. What age when do we simplify the rules, and when do we... When do we not, I guess. But I think you're right that it might be more a matter of which rules are you getting when, and then kind of adding them incrementally. But yeah, when I was DMing for D&D Club, or I mean, even as a new player, understanding I'm looking at 7 dice. I've never played a game with so many different kinds of dice before. Okay, whenever I'm doing anything, I need to roll this big one, unless asked otherwise. And so if I have that one, cool, I'm gonna roll it. I can tell you the number, and we can go from there. So like my first session when I was rolling for the DMPC, I would roll the D20, and like you rolled the damage, so that we just kept it really, really simple. So I also have a short attention span when it comes to rules or sitting around and waiting for something. So I'm not like 4, but
Can I say,
it's certain I wouldn't like D&D exactly for that reason, and it stopped being a problem. So I think if you can introduce them incrementally when they need to be played, or when they need to be kind of brought in, it helps. And I would gravitate toward starting with the lower level actors. I hear it was a while ago we talked to somebody, and they were trying to decide kind of with a new player what level should they start at, and they wanted to start them a little bit higher, like 3 or 5, so they would have more options. For me personally, at least, it was easier to start where there wasn't quite so much that my character could do, at least in terms of the mechanics that she needed to use. And so I think if you are starting, so like if you're playing with your kid and starting level 1, you don't have to follow like the experience points or whatever. At the point where they're bored with what their character can do, you can go ahead and level up. But I think that leaning extra on the rule of fun and
we lean on that rule anyway.
Silliness.
Yeah. And so another thing that you can do if you, because the character sheet can be overwhelming for a lot of people. They're just like stare at it and then eyes glaze over, and it's like, well, I don't even know. But you can do 99% of what you need to do with just the core stats, right? Strength, dexterity, wisdom, whatever the other ones are, right? Like you can do the majority of what you need. And if you just like direct them to those scores, hey, give me a strength check. Oh, you want to jump over a thing? Give me a dex check. Okay. Oh, if you get them used to that pattern, then you're going to have a good time. I've seen some really good resources on the D&D Next subreddit for newer players where they have like a character sheet that's color coded so that you can say, okay, yeah, take a look in the purple section, and that's where you'll find the more narrow skill sets like acrobatics and athletics and things like that. So that's another, there are aids out there that don't have to be like super stripped down.
As we were prepping for this episode on Twitter this week, and right now I'm totally forgetting the person's username. I can find it. Anyway, on Twitter this week, there was a dad posting D&D advice from his 4-year-old who plays and DMs. And one of my favorite pieces of advice that he had was, for DMs and players, make sure that you know all the numbers on the dice. And I was like, what a sweet piece of advice to make sure that you know what all these things are. But I didn't even think about that with a character sheet if because it is overwhelming of which part you look at when. So are they saying, is it color coded? You've gone through, like I've got I have Tasha's, but if we pretend Tasha's is a character sheet, so like this part would be purple, this part is yellow, and so I can just direct somebody. Yeah. Like that.
So the second year, I flirted with this idea for the second year that we did D&D Club, where before we ever really got started, it was kind of like you almost had to take like an intro to D&D class with me before we would start playing. And part of that class was getting to know your character sheet and highlighting, this section is the base stats, strength, dex, blah blah blah. This section is this. This is where your AC is and your HP, usually that's together. This is how spell slots work, stuff like that. And that was okay. I was like, I will improve this experience by making sure to front load it with education, right? Like I was very stick in the mud about it. And if I could go back in time, I would just do what I did the third year, which was we had a crash course at the first meeting and then just like, like it's going to be fine. And support, they knew that they could ask me for support when and where they wanted it. And it took a lot from me to not want to like hover or like, actually you need to make sure that let them know this are the rules according to the law because I know what they are. You can't actually summon a pixie like that. They don't care. They're there to unwind and tell a goofy, 99% of the time, unwind and tell a goofy story with their friends and throw some dice and yell at each other. And like, that's great.
Yeah. And I think like a kid playing with their parent, that goofiness is still going to be there in terms of the story. And I think you're not in that case going to have some of the things that we kind of ran into with D&D Club, like you have 10 kids and one book, so that made it harder. But I think maybe I don't know. I would lean toward, instead of necessarily simplifying spells or rules, just adding them incrementally. So picking a couple spells in, like if your kid is playing a caster who gets to choose between spells, maybe they choose a few spells for a particular environment, get to know those so they know what they're doing with their character, and then you can add on from there. The hard thing about it is that it's going to depend so much on the kid and how old they are. But from what I understand, it seems like kids who want to learn to play D&D seem to learn at a pretty early age. Oh, I totally forgot. There are those really cool, they just came out with books specifically for kids to learn D&D. Was it over the summer?
Yeah, it was like spells and magic and then like monsters and something. Yeah.
We're getting some questions in the chat about D&D Club. So
yeah.
Do you want to talk about how cool D&D clubs are for a second? And then also chat, we'd love to hear more questions or thoughts about like running games with kids in general. And I'm going to look up the name of those books so that we have it.
Yeah. Committed Gaming says, I have no idea how I'd run a game for 15 kids at once. So that was literally it. We started with in our first D&D club, we started with like 4 kids who kind of liked the idea of D&D, but had various levels of commitment to actually learning the rules or really playing D&D. And from that, once word got out that we had a little D&D game going, it spiraled and got really huge. And so there was a time, the first year that I started, where I have, it's one of my favorite pictures from my whole career teaching of, I have like literally 15 kids at this long table and I'm trying to run Lost Mines of Phandelver and we can't get anything done because there are 15 people sitting at the table with varying knowledge of, you know, what's going on, and people come in and drop out and stuff like that because they have, you know, after school events or doctor's appointments, or they've got to make up a test, or, you know, they've got 1,000 different things. And so definitely, I saw you mention, like, I read about finding kids who want to DM and then have them run games, but that seems like part 2 of the club. That's definitely a necessary evolution of the club because you're putting the ownership, the full ownership of the game into the kids' hands. And that is a worthy goal. So I think that if you started and you just communicated with the, you know, if you have 15 kids that are interested, that's awesome. I would advise to go ahead and start with those 15 because you're probably not going to get all 15 at the same time, and just make it clear that you'll run something for the ones that are there. We had in my like, I think it was my second year doing the D&D club, we set up a like adventurers guild structure to like explain why people were there sometimes or not there sometimes. So
oh yeah,
it was the Knights of Northern, and I would try to have little tiny baby arcs, little tiny baby jobs that could be accomplished in the very short amount of time that we had to play after school. And so it wasn't a big deal if, you know, we start the adventure with Bocephus and Ark and Damien, and we end the adventure with Jawanja and Ark and somebody else, right? Like, they kind of, we just kind of like all laughed off the people rotating in and out. And something that made for some really funny, like, oh, why were they hiding in the back of this kobold den? It's a funny like RP time for them. But I definitely like identified some of the kids that were really kind of into it. Like, there are some kids that are going to jump in with both feet and just be ready to roll around in it. Put those kids under your wing and start, you know, talking to them about, hey, you know, like, you can do this. Do you want to tell stories? Do you want to facilitate an experience? Like, you're going to learn the rules as you go. It's okay. I think we have to like super make sure that it's projected out there that it's okay to not do it perfectly, as long as you're making it fun and learning, right? Like, if you don't know a rule, jot down like what it is, look it up later and move on. But definitely I've one of the great successes from the 3rd year of D&D club was we had 6 tables running D&D and I was sitting there grading papers. That's how I like knew that we had made it, because they would come to me for some rules. I would be the adult in the room to make sure that nothing stupid happened, but it was really their club at that point. And I think that's that should be the goal, is, you know, give it to them. I know it's different with younger kids. Like, they're going to need help, but did you find those things, honey?
I did. So there are 4 books. It's called the Young Adventurers Collection. And so it appears that the books are Monsters and Creatures, Warriors and Weapons, Dungeons and Tombs, and Wizards and Spells. I Googled D&D for kids, and all these came up. So anyway, again, the Young Adventurers Collection is what it's called. There's also, I got this for my nieces, my brother, my sister and brother-in-law play D&D together, but there's the ABCs of D&D and the 1, 2, 3s of D&D, and I'm seeing it's recommending to me too Nobody Likes a Goblin, which looks really cute. Anyway, so like B is for Beholder is in the ABCs of D&D. I can't remember what the other ones are. Anyway, those are really cute, and so that's intended for younger kids. It says 3 to 7 years. My oldest niece in the side of our family that plays D&D, so my family
side.
And on my side of the family, my oldest niece is 4, and so she hasn't started playing yet. But we did get a really cool point from a parent today when we were asking for more advice on Twitter, and he was saying to let the kids' interest be your guide, and how I think it depends on the stories that they're watching at home, but your kids aren't necessarily going to have access to or know or even be interested in like the D&D lore. And so instead gearing it toward the stories that they are interested in and aware of, and those sorts of things, which I thought was really cool. Oh, and he said, I think the phrasing was that they might not respond to D&D lore, and said that they will craft missions and adventures based on home values and their current interests. So I know. Oh, I'm so sorry. We haven't figured out how to get rid of Streamlabs. So like my niece, for example, is obsessed with Elsa, which I'm sure is a surprise to no one who has a small child. And she also loves Bolt, and so whenever she's like playing pretend, it will usually be as Elsa or Bolt, or
if she's just going about her day. She's just like having breakfast.
Sorry, yeah, I mean playing pretend.
And Elsa.
Yeah, or I think Martian Mickey is the other one. Anyway, so what stories? I mean, because children are immersed in stories. Like, we're storytelling beings. Story is a natural part of what it means to be human. And so I think leaning into that, and instead of depending on the D&D lore, trying to follow some of the stories that they are already interested in, and maybe some of the worlds that they're already interested in, might help, to just kind of throw that out there.
Yeah. And there are so many cool, like, I think it was our friend John Gergar that was talking about that, but he mentioned that, you know, even if they don't have those like kind of cultural touch points that D&D is typically like leaning on, it doesn't mean that their cultural touch points can't be incorporated into the 5e rule set, or that they're any less valuable for storytelling. And I just thought that was kind of a great. I'm reminded of one of my DMs at D&D Club. Shout out Kobe, he's my guy. Right? Isn't he great? Anyway, but he did a Wendigo horror adventure where he used the 5e rule set, and just at his table they were investigating some creepy disappearances of lumberjacks in the Siberian wilderness, and it ended up being Wendigos, and there was an undead uprising, and it was very like Ash versus the Evil Dead, like chainsaws and shotguns versus unspeakable confusing monstrosities, you know, like in a more modern setting. And I just love that he took the rule set that his table was familiar with and then told his own story with it. That's
cool.
That's cool. Love it.
Is that where you were talking so much about lumberjacks last week during stream?
It might have been. Maybe it's been a while. I think he did that for a Christmas one. So
Okay, so
maybe
it's
it's
been
like a
little
lingering.
while.
You're not usually thinking about lumberjacks?
So I saw that we got a really, really good question in chat. What suggestions do you have for helping kids get into the role-playing aspect of D&D? My 10-year-old son is on the quiet introspective side, so I'm not sure if it will be initially difficult or uncomfortable for him to get into role-playing. I think that's such a great question. And I know it's different, but just to like start from personal experience, I had a hard time when we first started playing. I think it's a different kind of nervousness of like I wasn't comfortable at all doing a voice or anything in a group, and I did stuff like that in elementary school. But I'm talking like 3 years ago. Even with people that I knew, I was too nervous to. But playing one-on-one and me kind of learning, my first character sounds exactly like me because I was too worried to like do a funny voice. But I kind of found my way into being my character. And so a lot of what we found that works is like if you can be immersed into being your character and being like comfortable and goofy or really intense or haggard, like whatever it is that you want to do, if you can be a little bit over the top, I think that might help him feel more comfortable as well. So if he can kind of see you're willing to put yourself out there and be silly or weird or whatever, that will help him feel more comfortable, even if it takes him a little while. And his like version of role playing may look a little bit different. The other thing that I would suggest too is like if you can find a stream or show or something that he likes or is interested in, that the two of you could watch together and have a model for what that RP looks like, that can be really, really helpful. I don't know. I hope that at least helps with getting started, but I think it may take a little bit of time. And I know for me, like if I'm sitting with someone who's feeling awkward, like it can start to bounce back and forth. And I know it's different if it's like your kid or in our case, your spouse. But still, sometimes that happens to me. Like I'll start with a voice for when we're playing Tales of Eldora on Tuesdays. I'll start with a voice for an NPC and then either like lose it for a second and then I panic and then it's, I've lost it entirely, or I just get too nervous to maintain it, whatever that is. I think even if you're trying to be in character and fall out of it for a bit, or sometimes like if you're doing a voice in our game and it isn't the voice you're going for.
Everybody ends up being Russian, I think. I think,
but that was fine, right? And so it's like, okay, I'll find them in a second, and you just keep the story going instead of getting worried about that part. Just kind of push through it and see if you can kind of get warmed up together.
So I also think that how the role playing is expressed can evolve too, because there are some instances, like for me, I'll just say like, all right, then I'm going to walk over here and I'm going to bop him on the head, right? Like, I don't care. But that same thing could be, my character screws up his face and squints his eyes and walks over and bops him on the head, right? You're just, instead of being that character, you're narrating what the character is doing. And that can be like a little bit of a middle ground until they're more comfortable throwing themselves into a role. And I would also, I can tell sometimes if I'm playing with a new kid at D&D club, I can come on too strong and I'll just be blah, 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 and like I freak the kid out and they're just like, oh my God, this is not for me, right? Like it's important to be sensitive to what kind of energy is getting a reaction that's in the direction that you want them to be.
And we've talked about too, if you can ask some leading questions to kind of help draw them out. Like, okay, my PC runs in and stabs this guy in the chest, or like, And it doesn't have to be a really dramatic thing like a battle cry. Maybe they don't want to battle cry immediately at the table. Sorry, I got distracted from what I was saying. Yeah. But saying, okay, what does that sound like? Or what does that look like if you're trying to, if they're leading more into narrating what it is that they're doing instead of the RP. I think in a one-on-one too, if there's somebody that the player / the character feels comfortable with, that's going to help with the RP a lot. That was how I got to know my first character, was through interacting with Jonathan's DMPC. And I think that will be the case for you guys too, as you get your duet going together. There are going to be characters and places that he's comfortable with, and that will help kind of bring out the RP aspects a little bit more too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, sorry, I know I keep talking about this. For me, like I'm more introverted as well. D&D, and I mean, when I was little, we're in elementary school, I took part in this thing called Destination Imagination, which was like based on, anyway, it's improv. We would study like historical figures, and so then you like throw historical figures and places and all of these things into a skit that you made up on the spot and then perform it.
George Washington and Martha Stewart walk into a bar.
It helped me so much to get out of my box. And because I had this kind of safe place to pretend. And so I think that that's at least something to keep in mind. And we've seen kids at D&D Club who started really, really shy. Like the kid he was just talking about a second ago, who's leading his own adventures now.
Yes.
It takes time, but they've really gotten out of there. I don't know why we have that, like, why the box phrase, but yeah.
Oh, getting out of the box.
I got behind on what's happening in chat.
It's been so cool, like, watching those kids go from terrified freshmen that are afraid to do anything to just a couple of years later being the ones running games and commanding a table. And that's another thing that makes me really excited about the idea of playing D&D with kids, is it teaches so many like real skills that they can take in other areas and other aspects of their lives. I don't know, they call them like soft skills, but I think that's really annoying, because like they're real skills about how to, be insightful and detect the energy in a given social interaction, and how to navigate different personalities towards a unifying goal. Like, those are all how to be organized and tell a story, and those are all huge skills for young people to learn, and for old people to learn and keep learning. It's something I get really excited about, because I believe in it, and I've seen the difference that it can make in kids' lives.
And that, like, types of stories that we're telling, or like getting to be, one of the things I think is most exciting about D&D is that, like, you get to be a hero, you get to be really, you get to be powerful, you get to affect the world around you. So outside of our D&D writing, I'm a literary scholar. I'm working on my dissertation, so I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm writing about intersections between contemporary literature and ecology. So I'm looking at all of these things for the environment. What are we going to do about global warming? What are ways that we can stay positive about it? And then getting to be a druid who gets to, like, fix the environment somewhere. Sometimes that's really extra exciting. And it also gives me more creative ideas about how to approach and think about the world around me. So that's, just one example of that crossover and why that's important. But it could be something like there being a bully at school, or your own self-image. I mean, any of those things, interior and exterior villains. I think D&D provides an amazing outlet for all of that. Yeah,
and a lot of times, like, our kids feel powerless in the world. Like, we all do, to be for real, but none more so than kids who have very little power. And so it can be so cool to, here's here's some of that. You know, what are you going to do if you could? You know, what would you do in this situation? And to practice what that could look like as they come into their own power. It's like, you know, D&D is just like training wheels for life. Very practicable. Practicable? Is that the word?
Sounds good to me.
Awesome.
I know one thing I've noticed for, like, if one of our patrons asking us to make an NPC to go along with their kids' PCs, is that they tend toward the animal player characters or animal races more than maybe I see in adult games. So that's something to kind of think about that I think could be really, really fun. And some of the other... one of the points that the 4-year-old DM player made that I thought was really, really great was that you should always wait until the DM asks for you to roll, or at the end that you make sure that the DM knows what you want them, what you're trying to do before you just start rolling. And so I think that like knowing what the main mechanic thing that you're going to do is, okay, this is, I have a crystal, we'll pretend it's a dice. You have the thing, this is what I want to do. The DM says, okay, roll it. You roll the thing. That's what you're going to be doing most of the time when you're not interacting with the other person. So I think simplifying the rules in that way, and at least in terms of the presentation of it, you're not getting into all the different parts of the character sheet. You'll cover those as you go.
Yeah. I actually, the player's handbook has a really good little introduction to like what is the flow of play at the table, where, I mean, you could even look over that with the kid that you're going to play with. The GM describes a scenario, the player describes what they want to do, the DM asks for a certain roll, the player makes a roll, the DM describes the results. That's D&D, right? It's 5 steps and it goes in that order. And if we can follow those 5 steps. Plenty of board games have more steps than that, then you're off to the races. I love the, I don't know where I saw this because I know this isn't from me, but when I've had people ask me, like kids ask me, what is D&D? And I like, it's a game where we tell stories and we role play. And they're like, okay, what does that really mean though? And I'm like, okay, so imagine you're walking through the forest and you hear a howl in the distance and a wolf rushes up at you. What do? Oh, I would blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, boom, that's it. We're role playing. Like you're taking on the role of somebody in this scenario and then telling me what you want to do. And they're like, oh, cool, right? And so you can elevator pitches. You got it. This
is not directly related to what you were just saying, but I was remembering from D&D Club, and so I'm not sure that this would translate into, or if this would happen playing one-on-one, when you can work with them a little bit more on the rules versus 5, 8 kids at the table, you're going to be more limited in what you can do. But they, at least when I was DMing and when I was playing, because that was what I was doing to be helpful. It was kind of like the opposite of OPing a character or like min-maxing, where they like kept running with they're like level 5, right? And so this wizard is not using his 3rd level spells. He's just like running his cantrips over and over and over again. But I mean, they were having fun, so it didn't matter. It just took a little bit longer to kill some of the creatures, or we had to kind of knock down their hit points a little bit.
Oh no, the werewolf fell over and died.
Good job, everybody.
Good job, everybody.
I don't know what caused. I haven't yet figured out what caused that particular occurrence, but that was something I noticed kind of across at least at that table, where they had like all their different spells and they had them prepped and ready and everything, but like when it came down to it in combat, they stuck with what was really familiar, which was sometimes not the most, I think I'm trying to say they might not make the most optimal choice, but that's totally fine. I really think it'll depend on the kid too, like whatever know your child best. They're going to think it's super fun that they get to hang out with you and do this cool thing and tell stories. And that like that intense, focused one-on-one attention, I just think is amazing.
That's the biggest thing, I think. Like, play D&D with everyone, but especially the people that are the closest and nearest and dearest to you. Like I will beat this drum until my time to beat the drum is past, but I just think that it's such an incredible way to spend amazing time with the people that matter the most to you. And if that people is, knee high to a grasshopper, then do it anyway, because it's an amazing way to spend time together doing something cool.
To answer our most recent question in chat, we've had several parents run through the Crystal and Curse trilogy, and it's worked really well for them. And I think that, so we created a DMPC for those adventures, Garen, who he's kind of like a classic fantasy knight-ish character. And so I think like parent-child wise, he could really easily fit into that role if you have like a less mature PC and a more mature NPC, DMPC, who's kind of helping them navigate the world. And so I think that dynamic will work really well. We had I think it was a dad and son running through that first adventure, First Blush, which we wrote to help teach someone how to play D&D. And the child's PC died running through it the first time, which I would almost always say, like, please don't let that happen. Like, not good. But he actually used it as a learning opportunity. Cool, let's just do it again. And so they just ran through the combat again, like you would reset in a video game. So it wasn't a big stressful thing. It was just like just a reset. And so they ran through the combat again and let it go differently. And so I think knowing your kid, but just like having the space to fail at something, having the space to try to put ourselves out there is really important. But in short / in long, yes, I think that those adventures would work really well.
Yeah, and there are a couple of adventures on DM's Guild that are like geared to kids, but that's an area where I think that there's a lot of opportunity for people. Like, if you get into playing D&D with your kid and you have extensive notes and want to turn that into something that ends up on DM's Guild, that's an area where I'm going to Nostradamus for us here a second. That's an area that is going to grow, and get on that if you have any inclination in that way.
There's one, I think it is a one-on-one adventure for kids, but I haven't looked at it because you don't have kids. But I think it's called I Want to Go Home. And there's another one, it's like something about dreams that was designed specifically for children to look at. And then with my most recent Google searching for D&D for kids, there are a couple of sites that have some compilations of adventures. I think another resource, we see people on Reddit often asking about running D&D one-on-one. I think that could be something to throw out to parents, but we have a pretty extensive reach to people playing D&D with kids. And I'm hoping that we have more and more people taking part in this conversation kind of as it goes. I think some of it is still being figured out, but yeah, I'm excited. I think it'll be really fun. And I'm curious to see too, at what point do those roles switch, and does the child start DMing for their parent? Because I have a feeling that actually might happen sooner than you would think.
Flip those tables. Honey?
Yes.
I was wondering if you had any final thoughts or announcements or anything as we get close to our time.
Yeah, I was just glancing through my notes. Any additional questions, friends in chat, that you want us to think about? Or if something comes up later, if you'll just send those through, you can send us an email, beth@dndduet.com, or use the contact form on our site. Right. The other thread, I think we've mentioned, but the other through line of the advice with kids was the emphasis on silliness, which I think is always good. Besides that, we will be streaming Tabletop for Two on Tuesday. Oh my gosh, sorry. We will be streaming Tales of Eldora on Tuesday. All of the streams start with a T, so I get mixed up sometimes. Episode 7 of Tabletop for Two. We'll dive into personalizing campaigns for the PC. We've had some podcast appearances and shows in the last couple of weeks, and so those are coming up on the blog, or you can find them on our socials. So soon I think I'll have an interview on the Role Play Grow podcast with our lovely friends at Lighthearted Adventures. On Friday, I think, yesterday, sorry, I'm getting my days mixed up. I was on Dungeon Masters Guildhouse podcast with Matthew Whitby, and then we were on DM's Guild Community Jam last week. We've been doing all the things.
Been very social recently.
Yes. And we also have a new podcast out, World of Azuria, where you can tune in and hear the Age of Azuria fantasy series, along with some of the details around the world, if you are interested.
Yeah.
Okay, honey, I think those are all of my announcements. An extra special thank you to all of our friends in chat. It was so lovely to see some new names and faces, or not faces, but new names where we just imagined the faces. It was really fun hanging out with you all. Thank you so much. A special thank you to our friend there for sending in the question. Thank you, Mark. I think this has been a great conversation. I'm really hoping that we get more and more of them as we go along.
Yeah.
And just questions, but I also hope we hear more and more from parents about things that are or aren't working for playing D&D one-on-one with their kids.
Thanks so much for joining us for Tabletop for Two. We're live on Twitch on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can also find our live stream, Tales of Eldora, at 8 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. If you enjoyed this show and wait, I did it too, didn't I? So, okay. Tales of Eldora happens on Tuesdays. If you enjoyed this show and would like to support us in our work, consider checking out our adventures on dndduet.com and joining our Patreon over at patreon.com/Grove Guardian Press. Thank you all and happy gaming. Just the best. Mad love for you all. Bye.